Yuliia and you're watching New Multicultural's Community Hour. In this segment, we are talking about civic issues in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Since the start of CUAET program, Manitoba has welcomed 13,000 Ukrainians. Manitoba is a leader across the country in accepting and providing support to Ukrainians. Assistance to newcomers' families continues to operate thanks to volunteer contribution. I would like to introduce our guest, Nick Krawetz. He is volunteering supporting Ukrainians' family. Hello, Nick. Thank you so much for taking a seat with us today.
Thank you so much.
In today's interview, we are going to discuss basic needs of Ukrainian newcomers in Manitoba and what has been done during the year. First of all, Nick, can you please introduce yourself and tell us more about the work you do?
Sure. My name is Nick Krawetz. I'm a third-generation Ukrainian Canadian, and I'm also an active volunteer within Winnipeg's Ukrainian community. And since the full-scale invasion started last February, I have helped out and initiated various efforts to welcome and support the 13,000-plus Ukrainian newcomers that have sought a safe haven here in Manitoba.
How it is important for you to contribute to Ukrainian Canadian community and to be a volunteer?
It's very important because the full-scale invasion and what is happening in Ukraine has affected myself personally. In terms of my family, my immediate family, and my extended relatives have all been impacted by the war. Some have been internally displaced, including my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and my 9-year-old nephew, for example. And because they lived so close to the main international airport in Boryspil. And they actually saw the air defense system kick in on the first night of the full-scale invasion, and they had to pack up their vehicle and basically seek a safe haven in Western Ukraine. But in the meantime, other relatives remained in Kiev. They were, it was quite a desperate situation. And I also had relatives in Kherson Oblast that were under occupation. And learning of their hardship and their despair of what transpired with them has motivated me to help in any way I can and raise awareness of what is happening in Ukraine.
Where do things stand in terms of understanding the needs of Ukrainian newcomers in Manitoba?
Well, I think it's a good opportunity that we should acknowledge the efforts of the provincial government, who really is a leader across Canada in welcoming Ukrainian newcomers. No other province has done what the province of Manitoba has done. So for that, I'm extremely thankful and grateful for the approach and model and how they're welcoming these people. And for example, through the one-stop shop reception center at the airport hotel, that is a unique model in Canada. Nowhere else that happens. The temporary accommodations program, where newcomers can stay for up to 30 days, free of charge, 3 meals a day. It's a huge support for these people, and it gives them time to acclimatize themselves with Winnipeg. They're in a brand new environment. Many do not speak English, or they have a lower intermediate level of English, so it gives them those 30 days to get their documents in order, find longer-term housing, try to find a job, try to find daycare for their children if they have it. And again, no other province is providing that breathing room.
Yes, and what efforts did it cost to you and Ukrainian Canadian Congress to get it help and to get it assistance for Ukraine?
Well, we've been very fortunate because the provincial government has actually been a very willing partner to step up and help Ukrainians, and that's why we're very thankful for that. But it has taken a lot of efforts. The community supports have been tremendous. The amount of goodwill from everyday Manitobans, whether they're Ukrainian or not, has been this outpouring of support. People dropping off items, people calling, how can they help? How can we hire Ukrainian newcomers? It's been nonstop since February 24th of last year. So for that, it's really encouraging because Manitobans are living up to their slogan, Friendly Manitoba. And we're showing and demonstrating every day of why Manitoba is this beacon of hope for Ukrainian newcomers. And it has taken, though, a lot of time. There are literally hundreds of volunteers that have stepped up and are helping support newcomers, whether it's at the airport, whether it's at the reception center, whether it's at the various churches across the city or province. And there's also been a number of communities outside of Winnipeg that have also helped and welcomed people. So it's a sort of a whole of province and whole of community approach. And these efforts were immediately kick-started when the full-scale invasion started.
What helped to build this close relationship between Manitoba government and Ukrainian Canadian community?
Well, I think it's a few reasons. Historical reasons, for example, there's deep historical ties between Ukraine and Manitoba. over 180,000 Manitobans have Ukrainian roots. 1 in 7 in Winnipeg, I believe, are Ukrainian or are Ukrainian, or their neighbor is Ukrainian, for example. But regardless of that connection, it's on a human level. Nobody should be sitting idly by and watching genocide happen and not doing anything. It's a duty and obligation that we do support Ukrainians. Because Ukrainians on the front lines in the cities, the volunteer efforts going on in Ukraine, they are all defending freedom. Not only Ukrainian freedom, but the freedom, our freedom here in Canada. Because if Ukraine was allowed to fall, or if Ukraine did not stand, Canadians would be fighting right now. So I think that's a very important message to share. And our gratitude to Ukraine, its armed forces, its National Guard, for example, its volunteers, they have paid a huge price for their freedom, but also ours. And that needs to be recognized. And I think a lot of people are saying, it's charity, how long can this go on for? Ukraine fatigue. But I don't look at it that way. I think it is a duty. I think it's an investment in our collective security, because nobody wants to see, obviously, Canadians going over and fighting in the Baltic countries or Poland or wherever. But that's what Ukraine is doing right now on our behalf. So everything that we can do must be done to give them whatever they need to be successful in their fight against this Russian barbarism and aggression, but also in their defense of our values and freedoms that we hold dear as Canadians.
You've mentioned that different organizations and volunteers started to help Ukraine since the first day of the war. How does the situation look now? Is the quantity of assistance going down, or is it still a lot of attention to Ukraine?
Well, actually, the assistance started before February 24th of last year. For example, the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, because of the international warnings of the war would break out and sort of go to that next level, they were already positioning supplies in the neighboring countries in anticipation of the influx of people fleeing. So kudos to them for doing that, because that helped save a lot of lives and put people at ease, providing humanitarian aid. But since February 24th, for example, the phones started ringing immediately of how can we help, where can we donate, what items do you need, and people were dropping off truckloads of bottled water, baby formula, diapers, clothing, in anticipation of when this influx of Ukrainian newcomers would arrive. So luckily we had a few weeks to prepare, because the visa program did not open until mid-March of last year. And the amount of time that it takes to get a visa at that time was about a month or so. So by mid-April of last year, we opened the welcome desk at the airport, because that's when the first arrivals were coming with the visa. So thankfully we were operational, and the Winnipeg Airport Authority, we basically cold called them and saying, we have this issue, how can we help? Whatever you need, that was their response, we will be there and we will stand by you. So again, it's a very unique partnership in that sense, and a lot of other airports across the country were not as quick to that as compared to what happened here in Winnipeg. And it's because of those efforts, those partnerships, those collaborations, through the airport welcome desk, through the one-stop shop at the reception center of accessing services and supports, is how Winnipeg got the first federal charter flight to Canada in May of last year, where 300 plus people arrived, and the majority of them did stay in Winnipeg and Manitoba, and they've sort of trying to restart their lives here in a lot of aspects. But again, the goodwill, the support has not stopped. There's still people, texting and calling, saying, where can we donate? And the Community Aid Center at the UNF Hall at 935 Main Street has just been, an amazing operation in itself. And it's run all by volunteers. Same thing with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress here in Manitoba. There are no paid staff. It is all reliant on volunteers. And so what Manitoba has done could not have been possible without that support. And definitely encourage people to continue volunteering, because the war, unfortunately, shows no signs of stopping. And it's not going to stop before March of next month, when the visa program is supposed to end. There's a deadline set on that, and we're all advocating for an extension of that program. and hopefully the doors will remain open to Ukrainians fleeing war.
Every day Manitoba welcomes more and more Ukrainians. The Ukrainian Canadian community is growing. Is it becoming more difficult to provide help to everyone? For example, free accommodation, and I know that Ukrainians also get free food in the hotel. Is it becoming more hard?
Well, resources are not infinite, for sure. The provincial government has committed to continue and maintain their support, so that's definitely welcomed. And we certainly hope that that visa program at the federal level will remain open. And if that does happen, then we certainly hope for the existing level of support to be continued as well from the provincial government, from the federal government, in terms of accessing various programs and supports. But there are numerous challenges. Challenges that are somewhat unique to Ukrainians, but also not unique. They affect all immigrants or refugees coming from all over the world to Manitoba in that sense. For example, accessing English language courses, accessing daycare spots. These are not unique to Ukrainians per se, but given the language barrier, given the different dynamic of what we're seeing with Ukrainians, for example, with a one-income household, let's say if a mother has come with a couple of children, it's very different compared to other demographics where there's a two-person income or a two-parent household. So having the ability to find a job that covers off their expenses, it's very difficult to do if your English language is not sort of up to par or at an intermediate or beginner level. And if you have to watch one or two kids, it's very difficult to do that if you can't find daycare. So you have to make a choice between working and looking after your children. But how do you put the food on the table? How do you pay the bills? And the cost of living is not low here. It's different compared to a lot of countries. And certainly we're trying to job match individuals with higher paying jobs so that they can afford to stay here. Otherwise, they're going to have to make a very difficult decision of possibly returning to Ukraine. And nobody wants to see people being put at risk, put their safety at risk, if their own lives, if they go back to their home, if they have a home to return to. Potentially they could be killed from another errant missile or a drone attack. And nobody wants to see that happening. Everybody wants this war to stop, but unfortunately it's not. And it's going to continue for quite some time, sadly. So that's why it's so important that the community continues to not hesitate or to waver in their support. And we have to be talking about how can we support Ukraine on all fronts for as long as it takes.
You put a big effort into helping as many people as possible and spend a lot of time and energy, but sometimes people do not appreciate it. And the desire to help disappear. Have you faced a situation like this?
Not personally. For those that I've been able to help in, just simply providing a phone number or just telling them where to go, for example.
But it still takes a lot of time.
It does, but I think it's worth it because, if it was my family members in the same situation, I would want someone to help them. And my own family members have come through this program. They've benefited from the programs and supports that have been made available to them. And I want to make sure that everybody who's coming under this program to Winnipeg feels that welcome, feels that support. Because nobody chooses to flee their home. Nobody chooses to be a refugee, even though they may not be legally recognized as refugees. But regardless, a lot of the people that have come to date are from Mykolaiv. They're from Zaporizhia. They're from Kharkiv region, for example. They have seen horrendous things that no human should have to experience. They have firsthand experienced genocide, where people are being killed and thrown in open pits, for example, in Mariupol. These are scenes and images of the darkest days of the last century in World War II. This should never happen again. And there's that saying, never again. But it is playing out in real time. So that's why I think, again, I go back to this sense of duty and to help in any way we can. Because, again, what they're experiencing there is just, it's hell on earth right now. And, if we can be so kind in our Manitoba's hearts and wallets to remain open to do even just little things of, driving someone to an appointment or making a reference for a job interview or something, anything to help these people. It needs to be done. And it's regardless if they're thankful or not. Many of them are. I can tell you when the first federal charter flight came in Winnipeg in May, the last people off that plane were a family of 5 from Mariupol. And they saw the sunflower wall, they saw Rusalka dancers in their costumes, and they said it's just like home. So, when you hear that, it's an amazing feeling.
Are there enough assistance for Ukrainian refugees to help settle them in Canada? Like, we have a federal financial help, we have free accommodation, we have free food. Is this enough for the first time?
In terms of the financial assistance from the federal government, it is one-time funds. So certainly if you're looking for a down payment on a rental agreement, for example, putting groceries on the table, those funds will run out quite quickly if you don't have savings or if you don't have any resources, or if you've had to flee with the clothes on your back or a handbag, for example, when a lot of people were in the first few months of the war, when they were crossing into Poland, they were waiting on train platforms, waiting for their visa approvals to come through. So a lot of people actually ran out of funds while they were waiting for that to happen. But again, if people are going to be making the journey to Canada, I think they should be doing their research as well of what's available, where to go. And thankfully, Manitoba has stepped up, and the word is getting out that Manitoba is a very good place to come to, because Canada is a huge country with a lot of differences, and the cost of living differs from coast to coast to coast. But thankfully, the provincial government has provided that temporary accommodations program, which no other province has done, and it's a big help. But whether more can be done, absolutely. English language courses, for sure. People need to have a proficient level of English to get a good paying job so that they can survive and provide for themselves. But there's a 5 or 6 month wait to get into the placement courses that are covered by the federal government. However, those supports are all expected to end at the end of March of this year. That's why it's so important for those programs to continue, because people are not stopping. Coming. Every day at the airport, there's 50, 60, 70 people arriving at the airport. Some mornings at 9 o'clock, there's already 40 people waiting at the airport welcome desk looking for which hotel to go to. So, that's why it's so important that the community, every member of the community has to be speaking up, has to be writing to their members of parliament, to the ministers, pleading for these supports to continue. And the doors, like I've said, have to remain opened until this war ends.
Do you think that Manitoba is one of the best province to move?
Absolutely. Given the lower cost of living, given the supports from our provincial government, and through our provincial nominee program, where after 6 months of employment, after a certain threshold, they can start applying for PR status. It takes much longer to do that in other provinces. So it's certainly a big pull factor to Manitoba, I think. And people who are going to Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, for example, we've actually heard stories of people going there initially. They realize the cost of living is much higher, and now they've come to Winnipeg and Manitoba because their friend has come, or there's a distant family member or something. But also the large diaspora community here, it's well organized, and we're trying to help in every way possible. However small, however large that may be. And
how many opportunities to work here? Is it easy to find a job?
Well, I think there are a number of labor shortages in Manitoba, there's no question, particularly about a year or so ago coming out of the pandemic. And that's why this program that allows Ukrainians to work for up to 3 years on an open work permit is very beneficial, because they can go work anywhere. That will help the Manitoba economy as well. So it's sort of a win-win. And once they get their restrictions removed from their work permits, they can be allowed to work in healthcare, they can allow to be work in agriculture. But luckily, our economy here in Manitoba is diversified. So there's all kinds of opportunities in retail, transportation and distribution, agribusiness, aerospace. There's all kinds of industries looking for people. And I understand that all provinces and all countries, for that matter, are desperate for people right now, given the widespread labor shortages. So the Ukrainians coming here can certainly fill some of these gaps. And a lot of them are transitioning quite quickly out of the hotel into an apartment, into a job. And the feedback that we're hearing from employers is absolutely extremely positive. Hardworking people, they show up on time. They put in they actually want to work evenings or weekends so that they can provide for their families. For example, some employers have told us they've never been fully staffed before until Ukrainians started arriving. So that's huge. That pays dividends to our economy. It benefits all Manitobans when our economy is growing, and so it's a win-win situation. And again, we just want to make sure that continues.
Yeah, can we claim that CUAET program is a part of Canadian economic strategy? What benefits
That's an interesting question, but given the numbers, like when the program was announced, there was actually two programs that were announced. One for the temporary residence program through the visitor visa and the open work permit, and a promise to create a second program where Canadians could sponsor their family members to direct permanent residency. That has not been announced yet. The details are forthcoming. We are all waiting in anticipation for that second program to be announced. But the CUAET program, for example, I don't think the government at the time estimated the number of applications that they would receive. Almost 850,000 plus applications now, and they've approved about 540,000, I believe. So they're still processing over 300,000 applications. And to date, I think there's about 160,000 people that have come to Canada. So definitely it has an economic impact. And I think it's a positive one, though, for some people. However, there is a segment of Ukrainians that are fleeing the front lines. They are, in essence, true refugees. Their homes are destroyed. Their cities are wiped off the map. They're under occupation. There's genocide occurring. These people are literally fleeing for their lives. Those people should be technically recognized as official refugees to get access to certain supports and programs that were initially not permitted to them at the beginning of CUAET. The Ukrainian community across Canada, UCC National, UCC Manitoba, for example, were advocating for those supports that are given to refugees to be extended to CUAET holders. And that only kicked in June or July. So there was a few month gap where certain supports were not given to people getting off the plane. So it took a tremendous effort to advocate for that. However, those supports are now coming to an end in March of next month. So that's why it's so important for those to continue. And if there needs to be tweaks to the program, so be it. But they should also be recognizing the humanitarian sort of human factor here of a certain sector of those people that are true refugees. And that's lacking under the current CUAET program because it gives a sense of permanency. There's a huge stress and anxiety on those people who have no place to return to. If they're here temporarily, what happens after 3 years? There's this sort of cloud hanging over their head, not knowing what the future may hold. And how do you plan for the future? How do you invest in yourself if you go back to school or learn a new language like English? Or will you be kicked out in a few months being told to go back to Ukraine? And so for those people, I really hope that the federal government recognizes that there is a need to acknowledge and give official status to some people as official refugees.
Now we see that a lot of Ukrainians, after a few months living in Canada, coming back, return to Ukraine or to Europe. What is the main reason why are they unsatisfied about living in Canada?
Well, I don't know if it's a matter of unsatisfaction. I think it's the nature of the program. They're given a multi-entry visitor visa, which allows them to go back and forth whenever they so choose. So everybody that has come under different circumstances, different situations. There is no data available that shows how many out of the 160,000 that have come to Canada have actually gone back. We don't know that number. However, we do know that over 13,000 people have come to Manitoba to date, and that number is growing every day. But sure, there are people that, let's say for a mother or a wife who hasn't seen her husband in over a year, if he is fighting on the front lines, I can certainly understand why she may want to go see her spouse again and come back maybe. But that is the nature of the program. They're allowed to do it. So I don't necessarily see it as a negative or people saying, Canada is horrible. But on the same term, another way of looking at it is, Canada is not for everyone either. It's very expensive to live here. There's high taxes, and some people just simply cannot afford that. And that's why it's important that there's more flexibility built into this program to recognize those needs of people that may be under more limiting circumstances or people that have no home to return to.
What would be your messages to people who are thinking about moving to Canada but still cannot decide, are they ready for this or not? What types of questions should they ask yourself before coming to Canada?
That's a very good question. I think they should be doing their homework and doing their research of what Canada has to offer. Before they come, there's lots of work that they can do potentially to maybe improve their English online, for example, and that will help them get a job more quicker. But reach out to the various Ukrainian Canadian Congress chapters across the country. There's all kinds of social media groups available to ask questions. What's it actually like here in Manitoba? I know lots of bloggers and people doing their YouTube videos of their own perspective, but again, it's hard to take those at face value because that is one person's experience. Hundreds of thousands of people have applied for the program. They're looking to come to Canada, but every one of those situations is different. Their circumstances are different. Some may have children, some may not have children. Some may have an elderly parent or a grandparent. Some may be, who knows, on the front lines, or some people may be in Lviv, for example. It's a very different world. But Canada, though, has stepped up. It is a beacon of hope. Our doors are open, and I think Ukrainians should be considering applying, whether they want to come or not. At least if the war spreads or intensifies, and by all accounts, by this spring, summer in Ukraine, there are going to be some very large battles happening that may determine the course of the war. So how that plays out is anybody's guess. But if there's an application window that's remaining open, I certainly encourage people to apply for that, whether it's an insurance policy or not. Because again, nobody knows how this war will end, and and hopefully it will end in Ukraine's favor. But again, the amount of atrocities happening in eastern and southern Ukraine, the genocide, people should be looking at that quite closely, I think, because that has no place in the 21st century, but Ukrainians are living that reality every day. Thankfully, my relatives are not, facing genocide, so I can't speak for those people, who are in that situation. It's very difficult. I can tell you that my relative, for example, in Kherson Oblast, there were Russian soldiers that came into her house. She has 2 teenage children, and the soldier asked to sit on their knees, and they put a gun to her head. So how does someone feel? How does someone make a decision in that moment? You have to think of the safety of yourself and your children, whether it's in another part of Ukraine or outside of Ukraine. And hopefully a lot of the people that have come here temporarily will return, will help rebuild Ukraine. But again, it's a very personal decision that people have to make. But they should have information, make informed decisions before uprooting your life and moving halfway around the world. It's a huge decision to make. I know a lot of people, for my own immediate relatives, they'll have to start from scratch. They have no friends, no network, no job history, very limited English. So how do you think about moving when you have those practical kind of concerns or questions? So again, we're thankful for the program. It's open. There's lots of sources of information out there, and people should be reviewing that to make their own personal choice.
Thank you, Nick. I think with that, we're going to conclude our today's discussion. Thank you for this great conversation.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And thank you our audience for joining us today. We hope you enjoy it. If you like the episode, please like, share and subscribe to see our upcoming episodes.